Hi everyone, today we're going to do some oxyacetylene welding. I'm going to show you how to set up your regulator tanks, how to safely use your torch, and how to do some basic fusion welding with some flat bar. This is just regular steel. So first off, setting up your tanks, we've got two here. We have an oxygen tank and we have an acetylene tank. I have a little rhyme that I follow for all of these steps. It's always going to be A before O, acetylene before oxygen, or up you go. Don't ask me why, but it's going to help you remember every single step. So before I get started setting up my tanks, I need to make sure that my torch and everything has been set up correctly. We need to make sure that the tip, there's a tiny little hole here. We need to make sure that the tip is clean. It's hard to see. You need to make sure the tip is clean. If you do need to clean it, and you can tell once you actually start welding, you can use a tip cleaner. Tip cleaners look something like this. You need to pick the right size for the one that fits in that hole. First, we're going to do the acetylene first. We're going to open up the main valve here half a turn. So if this is my start, I want it to get to here. And I've drawn a little line here to help remember. Half a turn. Now the last person who used this did not purge the valves, but usually when you get to it, let me just purge that valve for a second. Release the pressure on my regulator. There we go. This is basically how much fuel is left in the cylinder, and this is how much pressure will be coming through. So in order for me to increase pressure that is going to be coming out of my torch, I'm going to have to adjust the regulator. I'm going to open up the knob on my torch handle for the acetylene or the fuel. Just open it up. Don't worry about how big it is yet. And I'm going to adjust the regulator here. I'm going in the plus. You can see plus or minus. I'm going plus, and I'm going to increase it to about 6 psi. Here we go. We're at 3, 4, 5, 6. If you look very closely there, and you can hear the acetylene actually coming out. Go ahead and turn off your knob. This one is set and ready to go. Next, we have our oxygen tank. We need to adjust this till we have between, I'm going to say 5 and 10 psi coming out of this. We're going to open this valve all the way until it stops. We're going to take our torch handle, open up the oxygen, adjust the regulator until we have between 8 and 10 psi. It's hard to see the numbers, but we just need that little valve needle to show it just a little bit. Right there, that's good. Turn off your torch valve. So if you look closely, you can see that the needle on the left is just open a little bit. And down on the acetylene, it's around 6. Let's zoom in there a little bit. You can see that the PSI is just about 6. If you look on the left dial, you can see that there's a red zone. Do not push acetylene past 15 PSI. Next, you need to have some sort of eye protection. We're going to be using a number 9 screen here. This allows it to protect your eyes and your face from the heat, mostly your eyes, so that your eyes don't hurt while welding. Welding with just bare eyes is going to hurt for a while. You need to have a set of gloves ready. We're using leather gloves here to protect from burns. And I've got pliers here to pick up hot material after we've been welding. If you pick up hot material with bare hands, you're going to get all blistery. I'm going to set up my 2 pieces of flat bar here with a slight gap in between. And I'm using fire brick to prevent my table from getting hot, and fire bricks will not explode when heated or anything. So now that I have my metal set up, I have my torch all ready to go. All I have to do is open my acetylene valve just a little bit, or fuel valve. This one's using acetylene. Open up just enough that you can feel it on your hands, or you can put it up in your ear and actually listen. I'm wearing these wicked glasses. Just enough to feel it. Take your striker, hold it on a slight angle, side here, and you get a nice sooty flame. All that black stuff is carbon. We want to get rid of that or it makes a big mess. I'm going to open up my acetylene valve until that black smoke goes away and I have a nice feathered flame. Delicious. If you're doing thinner material, you don't need as hot of a flame. In this case, we're doing 1/8 inch flat bar, so I'm going to open that up until I get a nice roar. I don't have a special number for this. Beautiful. Next, we're going to open up our oxygen and add some oxygen to this mix. Watch carefully what happens to the flame. Now, if you look at it, it looks like we have two different cones here. We've got a very bright one, and we have a longer one here. Don't try to touch it, but you can get pretty close without feeling any heat. I'm not going to purposely do that though. All right, I'm going to adjust some more oxygen until that one cone gets nice and tiny. So here's just, I set the exposure on the camera down a little bit so you can see the two different cones. When you first have just acetylene, you've got that, add your oxygen, and you're going to see two different color flames essentially coming out. We've got a short bright one and a long one there. I'm going to add more oxygen until I have a very nice little cone that's maybe less than 1 centimeter long. All right, let's do some welding. So I have my flat bar set up with a very slight gap in between. I want to have a little bit of a gap to allow the metal to penetrate when it gets welded together. I'm going to start by tacking both ends, and then I'm going to do a fusion weld. To tack first, I'm going to heat it up. I'm going to hold my torch on about a 45-degree angle and kind of zigzag between the two pieces while concentrating on one area. If this is taking too long, you could increase the pressure and get more heat. What we're looking for is both pieces of metal to basically turn molten. You'll see it start to get shiny on both sides, and then those two shiny parts will join together into one puddle.
Here it comes.
Back and forth, let them join, there we go. There we have now a little puddle. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. I've dropped the exposure on the camera so you can get a better look at what's going on here. So I'm holding my torch on about a 45-degree angle, zigzagging back and forth between the two pieces. I'll hold the torch on the other side so you can see better. And I want to get a nice little puddle going. Back and forth between the two. And I'm just hovering above the metal. I don't want the torch to actually touch the metal. Here comes my puddle. Should join soon. The two sides are getting molten. And I want those two little puddles there to become one. Wait for that moment. You can do little circles or zigzags. There it is. You see that? Now we have a nice little joint. Now that I got my two sides tacked, I'm going to practice laying a fusion weld, which is basically taking that puddle and pushing it down the length of my joint here. Pushing it down the length of my joint here. Whether you're left-handed or right-handed, it doesn't matter. You got to find a way that works for you. I'm going to go in this direction and push my puddle that way. So I'm going to heat it up, get that puddle molten again. I'm holding my torch on about a 45-degree angle. Get that thing heated up. Then I'm going to push the puddle. If I stay in one place for too long, once my puddle's going, I run the risk of actually burning through and burninating my metal. There we go. Keep your heat even on both parts of your metal. There we go, it's getting shiny. I'm waiting for that puddle to join. Here it is. I'm slowly going to zigzag and push forward with my torch. Now this flame is extremely hot. You're probably looking at over 3,000 degrees. Keep pushing that puddle all the way down the length of your metal. I do zigzags, but you could also do circle movements. I think that's personal preference. You can see that small molten puddle moving towards the end. You don't have to do giant circles. This is fairly thin material. We just want to work it down to the end. Don't go faster than your puddle. Slow down and let it go. Once you're finished your weld, turn off using the acetylene first, A, and then O. You can take this to a bucket of water or to the shop sink to cool it down. Be careful of the steam when this goes. Don't put your face directly above. Normally in welding, I'm not going to cool it down in a sink. I'm going to let it cool naturally. I don't want the weld to crack and become brittle. But when we're just practicing, I think it's okay. Once it's dried off, you can shine it up with a brush. And we can take a closer look at our fusion weld. It's nice and flat. I think this looks pretty good. If you flip it over, when you flip it over, you can see that the metal did not really penetrate too much through the gap there. If you wanted to get more penetration, you can put a little bit more space in between your metal. The next form of welding that we're going to be doing is using filler rod to weld these two together. So the first one was just fusion welding, letting the metal itself melt together. This one we're going to be adding a little bit of metal to it to fill in our gaps, maybe give it a little bit more strength, a little bit more material in there. I find this is actually easier to get my puddle started and control. Let's do this. So once again, light your torch, just a little bit. I want a nice little flame. I'm going to increase the pressure until it's feathered again. Add my oxygen. I'm going to do my tack weld with my filler rod by heating the two up together to get it almost a puddle. I like to get this nice and hot before just sticking a cold rod on top of there. Just a quick tack. And do the same thing to the other end before it expands or contracts. Go evenly between your two pieces. Now it's getting kind of hot. I can tell it's about to go molten. I'm going to throw a little bit of filler rod in there. Just enough to hold it together. This one's not for strength. Now I'm ready to run my bead here. Now then, so just quickly, before I do this, my filler rod here, I'm just using a very thin one. I've got two ends to this. One here and one here. If you notice, I've added a bend to it. I do that so I remember which is the cold end and which is the hot end. So my cold end, so I always know that if I grab here, I'm going to be mostly safe, unless this thing is only 3 inches long. And this end, I'm going to assume that it's hot. Don't go touch it. Don't go lick it. Don't go lick it. Please. All right, let's get back to welding. I'm going to be wearing my gloves, and I'm going to be holding it like this. With my torch, I'm probably going to be doing a very small circular motion and dipping this into the puddle kind of as I go forward. So you'll see me circle dip, circle dip, circle dip, circle dip, all the way along where I want my weld to be. Light it. Increase your acetylene until it's feathered. That black smoke goes away. Increase your oxygen until you have that nice little cone. And let's weld. Heat this up until it gets molten, and then we're going to start adding our filler material. So I want to get that puddle started before I add filler material because I really want to make sure that the metal is melting, not just my rod. Here we go. Puddle's starting. I'm going to do circle, dip, circle, dip, circle, dip. There, get a little bit more of a puddle going. There we are. And I just kind of circle dip, maybe every 1 or 2 circles. Let this go forward. I'm going to stop there and we can take a look at it. Acetylene and then oxygen. So if I look closely at that, I see I have a very nice I have a nice weld on top. It's going to be strong enough. I can flip it over and see how the penetration is. Again, maybe not enough penetration. I think I'm going to have to add more heat. Let's continue this with some more heat. So again, let's get our puddle started. I'm just going to continue from where we left off. And remember that your filler rod is going to get shorter the longer you weld. Just be aware of where you're holding it. Okay, puddle has started. I'm gonna do a couple circle, dip, circle, dip, circle, dip. My filler rod sometimes goes in between the flame and the metal. That kind of preheats it and then lets it drip into that little puddle. There we go, much nicer. I've increased the heat, or I increased the pressure. This is working lovely. Acetylene off, oxygen off. It's not a bad weld. I'm a little bit rusty on this. I don't do this as often since I've been using a MIG welder, but I think this is going to be strong enough. Let's clamp it to a vise and smack it with a hammer and see how it holds up. Don't forget your safety glasses, and be careful you don't hit your hand on this hot metal. So, what does that tell me? If I look very closely at it, it broke off with very little effort. I got very little penetration, and it was mostly just a surface weld. So that tells me that I need to have a bit more of a gap and add more heat to get through a piece of metal like that. Let's do it again.
अगर आपके फोन में मल्टीपल 4, मल्टीपल 7, मल्टीपल 8 आ रहे हैं, मैं मान ही नहीं सकता आप लाइफ के अंदर प्रॉब्लम फेस ना कर रहे हो। मैं मान ही नहीं सकता, क्योंकि ये सारी चीजें जो आपके मोबाइल के पैटर्न से कंट्रोल होती हैं। इतना ही नहीं, आपका मोबाइल अगर आपके डेट ऑफ बर्थ के साथ कंपैटिबल नहीं है तो भी आपको प्रॉब्लम फेस होगी। और ये सारी विद्या एंशिएंट है, क्योंकि अंक शास्त्र हमारी बहुत ही प्राचीन विद्या है। लक्ष्मी यंत्र भी इसके साथ जुड़ा हुआ है। सो देर किस बात की, ऐसी विद्या को सीखिए। 2 दिन की ब्यूटीफुल मोबाइल न्यूमरोलॉजी वर्कशॉप में ला रहा हूँ। इसके साथ साथ आपको हमारा 5000 रुपीज का सॉफ्टवेयर भी तो बिल्कुल मुफ्त मिलने वाला है। सो देर किस बात की, अपनी हेल्थ, रिलेशनशिप, करियर और पैसों की फ्रीक्वेंसी को बढ़ाएं। नीचे दिए गए लिंक पे क्लिक करें और जुड़ जाएं।
Start with my tack, just to hold it in place enough. Get it hot before you add your tack. That's just to hold it together. There's not going to be any real strength there. All right, let's heat this thing up. I turned up the heat. I'm going to add some bigger welds. I'm going to go a little bit wider and really try to penetrate this metal. All right, circle, dip, circle, dip. I'm going to take my time, really get that metal melted through there this time. Careful of how close you are so you don't get any kind of dip or flashback. Adjust your grip on your filler rod now and then to make sure you're not getting too close to the metal with your fingers. No, nice and slow, nice big wide welds here. Acetylene, then oxygen to turn it off. Wait for that to cool for just a moment and let's flip it over. Lovely. So we have a lot more penetration coming through this one. Still not quite enough to make it extremely strong, but it might hold up better than the last one. So if you look closely at that, there's a little bit more penetration than there was before. You can see it more down on this side. Here, not so much. But this one's where we ended. We had the whole metal going really, really hot. Do not touch this. This will blister a lot. Let's flip this over and take a quick look at that. That's a decent weld. You can tell that it's really curved into the metal a little bit more, kind of like this, like a scoop. I could go over it again if I wanted and add a bead on top of that. But let's see how strong this one is. It's clamped in. Let's grab our hammer. That's much stronger than the first one. Let's hit it from both sides. So depending on its use, this would be a fine weld. I think we need to go get a bigger hammer. So we got an 8-pound sledge. Let's try that one. Now it is bending a little bit, but the weld is still holding. Let's get a closer look at that. Not too bad. It's still holding up pretty good. Now just for fun, let's just break it. So once we are done welding, we need to turn off this whole setup. I'm going to start by purging the valves. So to purge the valves, I'm going to close my acetylene first. Close that till it's tight. I'm going to roll back my regulator, the minus, or in this case counterclockwise. Open my acetylene to make sure all the gas is left the acetylene valve. Empty. If you look closely at here, it'll be reading 0. Next, oxygen. Turn it off all the way. Clockwise, good. We want to get this to be empty, reading 0. I'm going to turn my valve back all the way, counterclockwise. Open my valve, and this should be going down to nothing. Turn it off, wrap it up for everybody else. Put your striker away, clean up your mess, and practice every day. So just to recap, this is how I do it with my classes. This is not necessarily industry standard, but this is what works well for us at a complete introductory level from grades 8 to 12. Have an awesome day.